The girl's eyes did not blink. Not when the smoke turned black, not when the sky went orange, and not when her mother's shawl slipped from her shoulders, caught on a nail, and burned. Ash clung to her like a second skin, up her legs into the curls at the nape of her neck, blackening the white socks that once had lace. She sat cross-legged in the dirt, barely 6 small as a shadow, and did not cry. Around her the fire hissed and spat, devouring the last timber ribs of the house as if it had always wanted to. There had been a scream once, but it was gone now. Now there was only the wind and the heat and the silence where voices used to be. Far off the prairie held its breath. The sun crouched low, dragging bruised clouds behind it, and the wind carried the smell of ruin. Nothing moved but the fire and the child. He didn't see her at first. The cowboy had come back for the mare, left her tied to a post when the blaze turned mean. Should have kept riding, he thought. Should let it burn. But he turned anyway, something in his gut souring. He didn't expect to find anything standing, and he didn't expect to see the girl. She was so still she didn't look real, the kind of stillness only grief makes. He dropped to a crouch, not too close. Firelight flickered off his face, casting shadows in the worn lines around his mouth. "Little girl," he said, but she didn't flinch. He took off his hat and held it in both hands, like a man kneeling in church. "You can't stay here." No answer. Behind her a roof beam cracked and folded in on itself. Sparks shot up like angry stars. The cowboy stepped forward, slow and careful. His boots crunched cinders and brittle glass. Her eyes followed the fire, not him. She wasn't waiting for help. She was waiting for someone to come out of it. He looked at her again, face smudged, cheeks streaked with soot, lips chapped from the heat. Her hands were curled in her lap like she'd folded them in prayer. He said quieter this time, "Ain't nobody left in there?" Still she didn't move. The wind picked up, pushing smoke into his lungs. He coughed and wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve. He looked over his shoulder. He could walk away. Say he never saw her. Folks wouldn't ask questions, not this far out. But he didn't move. He took off his coat, wool, heavy, scarred at the sleeve, and stepped close enough to drape it around her shoulders. She didn't resist, but she didn't reach for it either. Just sat there, arms pinned, now looking straight ahead. He stood, rubbed his jaw, eyes scanning the horizon. There wasn't a town for 20 miles. Not a soul nearby who'd take her. And he hadn't been anyone's guardian before. Didn't plan on becoming one now. Still, he bent again, wrapped his arms under hers and lifted. She didn't scream, didn't kick. She just hung there, a bundle of smoke and bone. The mare snorted as he approached, uneasy with the scent of flame. He settled the girl in front of him on the saddle. She leaned back against him like a sack of grain, weightless in the way of children and grief. He gave the house one last look. The fire had gutted it clean. They rode into the dark. The land flattened ahead, wide as a breath you couldn't take. Coyotes sang far off, and the cold settled in behind the heat. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Hours passed before she spoke at all. Her voice was no louder than wind through grass. Mama was baking bread. He swallowed hard. He nodded once, though she couldn't see. She put it in the oven. Said we'd eat when it cooled. She tilted her head like she was listening for something far away. I told her I wanted to wait by the fire. He didn't know what to say to that. So he said nothing. They rode on. The sky above them turned black, then purple, then almost kind. The girl's head dropped against his chest, heavy now with sleep or sorrow. He didn't know which. He shifted the coat tighter around her and guided the mare west, back to the shack where he'd left his own silence. The shack sat in a gully between 2 hills, as if the earth itself had tried to hide it. Built with weathered hands and whatever boards a man could steal or salvage, it leaned slightly to one side like a drunk too proud to fall. No fence. No flowers. Just dirt, stone, and a crooked smoke pipe that hadn't seen fire in weeks. He hadn't meant to come back here, not this soon. The place felt colder now, emptier somehow. But it was shelter and she needed warmth. He lifted the girl from the saddle, slow so as not to wake her. But her eyes opened anyway, wide and dark, like she'd never really closed them. "We're here," he said, quiet. She looked past him. The shack didn't scare her. Maybe nothing did now. He carried her through the doorway, his boots heavy on the warped boards. Inside the room was dim, all shadow and dust. A rusted stove stood in the corner, quiet as a coffin. He set her down on the one cot and threw his coat over her again. She didn't resist. He knelt beside the stove and struck a match. It took time, fumbling with the kindling, coaxing flame from what little wood he had. When the fire finally caught the light, wavered across the walls, showing the old chair, the chipped basin, the tin cup still on the table from the morning he left. The girl watched it all without comment. He looked over. "You hungry?" She blinked. "I got beans," he added. "And some cornmeal." "It ain't much." She nodded once, almost politely. He took it as a yes. He worked in silence, heating the beans over the stove, adding water to stretch them. He glanced at her now and then. She hadn't cried. Not once. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, palms pressed tight like she was holding something she didn't want to lose. He set the plate down in front of her, warm and plain. She picked at it without a word, eating slow, mechanical. A machine still running on memory. After she spoke again, so soft he nearly missed it. "What's your name?" He didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure why. "Call me Harlan," he said finally. She gave the smallest nod. "I'm Sadie." He repeated the name in his head. Sadie. It sounded too big for such a small girl. Or maybe it was the opposite. Maybe the name was trying to hold her together. He leaned back in the chair and stretched his legs toward the fire. The warmth didn't reach his bones yet. "You got anyone else?" he asked. She didn't answer. "Kinfolk, neighbors?" She looked up then, her eyes tired but steady. "They left. Left when the well went dry." He rubbed the stubble on his chin. That happened more and more now. Whole families pulling up stakes, going north or east, anywhere the earth wasn't so damn tired. "Your ma and pa stay behind." "Pa died last spring. Snake bite." Harlan nodded. "And your man?" Sadie looked at the fire. Her throat worked like she had to swallow something sharp. She was still waiting on the bread to rise. He didn't press her after that. The wind outside had picked up, brushing dry leaves against the walls like fingers. The fire inside popped and hissed, and the shadows leaned closer. Harlan shifted in his chair. He hadn't shared this space in a long time. Not since his brother left. Not since that last argument. There had been voices here once, boots by the door, a rifle leaning in the corner. Now there was just a coat on a little girl and the quiet crackle of wood burning low. He stood and rummaged through the small trunk near the cot. Found a threadbare blanket and tucked it around Sadie. She was already lying down, not asleep yet, but close. Her eyes moved slowly across the ceiling, watching nothing. "I'll be right here," he said. She didn't nod this time. Didn't move at all. He let the fire burn low. Outside, the land curled into itself, waiting for morning. Inside, a stranger and a child shared silence like a secret neither wanted to name. Stay with us for more tales where mercy defies the rope and love outlives the law. Subscribe now. The next morning broke without fanfare. No bird song. No golden light. Just a dull gray that seeped in through the warped slats of the shack and settled on everything like a film of ash. Harlan rose stiffly from the chair. His back ached from the angle he'd slept in, head slumped forward, boots still on. The fire had died to a hush of embers. Cold crept back in through the floorboards. Sadie was awake, staring at the ceiling like it held answers. She didn't move when he stood, didn't speak. Just blinked slowly, her hands still tucked beneath the blanket. He stoked the fire back to life, poured a bit of water into a dented tin pot. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was just wide like the land outside and full of things neither knew how to say. She sat up when the coffee started to boil. Harlan poured it for himself, then hesitated, poured a second half cup and added water to cool it. "Here," he said, offering it to her. She held it carefully with both hands. Her fingers were small and pink at the knuckles, the rest still smudged with soot. He sat across from her, sipping in the quiet. "What were you doing out there?" she asked finally. He looked up. "Just riding through." She seemed to consider that. "You live here?" "I did. Off and on." "Why'd you leave?" He took another sip. "Didn't have a reason to stay." She nodded like that made sense. "Now you do." He gave her a long look. There was no innocence in her voice. Just fact. Like she'd made a decision and expected him to abide by it. He set the cup down. "You don't know me, Sadie?" "I know you came back." Her voice was steady, and that unnerved him more than any crying would have. She was too calm, too certain, like she'd already measured him and made peace with whatever came next. "I ain't the kind of man people count on." She shrugged. "I'm not people." That stopped him. For the first time, a smile ghosted across his face. Barely there. He stood and stepped outside to split wood. The axe blade bit into dry rounds of mesquite, sharp thunks echoing across the land. He worked without thinking, just rhythm and breath, like a man trying to remember what it meant to be useful. Sadie came out after a while, still wearing his coat. It dragged the ground behind her. "Show me," she said. He looked at her. "Show you what? How to do that?" She pointed to the axe. "You ever split wood before?" She shook her head. He hesitated, then handed her the axe, guiding her hands into place. "It's heavy." "It's supposed to be," he said. "Let the weight do the work." She tried. The first swing hit off center, barely notched the round. "Good start," he said, kneeling beside her. "Try again." The second swing landed better. Still not deep, but true. She set her jaw, raised the axe again. They worked like that for an hour. Harlan guiding, correcting. Sadie learning without complaint. She was small, but she listened, and he could see already she was built like iron under all that ash. When the stack was high enough, he handed her a canteen. She drank deep, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Now what?" she asked. He looked out across the prairie. "Now we figure out what's next." She followed his gaze. The horizon stretched flat and far, empty except for sky and hope. "I don't want to go to a town," she said. "No one said we would. People talk too much in towns." He grunted. "They do." She sat beside him on the steps. A hawk wheeled high overhead, silent in its circles. "Did you have a family?" she asked after a while. "Had a brother. Long gone. Mama said family's what you make when you don't have any." He looked at her, but she didn't look back. Just picked at a thread on the sleeve of his coat. "That what you're doing?" he asked. She nodded, eyes still on the horizon. "I think so." He didn't answer. Just sat beside her as the morning settled over them, soft and cold. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. By the end of the week, she was feeding the fire without being asked, hauling kindling in her arms, her boots thudding soft and sure on the porch. They were too big for her, his old pair cut down and stuffed with wool, but she walked in them like she'd been born for the weight. Harlan noticed it in quiet moments, the way she watched everything. How she marked where he stored things. How she mimicked the way he knotted rope, held a hammer, sipped coffee. She wasn't just surviving. She was studying. They didn't speak much, not unless it was necessary. a word here, a nod there. But something had settled between them, something steady and unspoken, like two old dogs who'd stopped circling and laid down on the same porch. She slept through the nights now, though sometimes he heard her whispering in her sleep. Words he couldn't make out. Names, maybe. Prayers. He never asked. In the mornings they worked. She swept the floor. He repaired the fencing out back, what little there was. They dug out the stovepipe, patched a hole in the roof with tin he'd salvaged 2 summers ago. She helped. Not always well, but always willing. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the hills, he brought out a horse blanket and draped it over the porch rail to dry. Sadie stood watching the sky. "Why'd you really come back that day?" she asked. He didn't answer at first, then didn't sit right leaving the mare. She spooked easy. "You came back for a horse." He shrugged. "I came back." She turned to him. "My mama used to say there's 2 kinds of men in this world. The kind that leaves and the kind that stays. And what kind do you think I am?" She looked at him a long time. "I think you're still deciding." He let out a slow breath through his nose. That felt fair. Later that night, when the stars hung low and sharp above the roof, she brought out a box he hadn't seen her with before. It was small and scorched at the corners. She sat cross-legged on the cot, the box in her lap, her face half lit by the fire. He glanced over but didn't speak. She opened it slow, reverent, and pulled out a small bent hair comb. Then a scrap of blue ribbon. Then a spoon with a dented handle. She laid each item on the blanket in front of her like a priest setting out relics. She packed it before the fire, she said, voice barely above the crackle of wood. He nodded. "She told me to take it and run." "I didn't." He didn't speak. Sadie stared at the spoon. She always used this for tasting stew. Never a different one. She touched the ribbon next. "This was in her hair the day Pa died. Then quieter, she gave me this comb when I turned 6. Said it was my turn to take care of things." The fire flickered across her face, making her look older than she was. Or maybe just more honest. Harlan crossed the room and sat beside her, not too close. "You did take care of her." She shook her head. "Not enough." He watched the flames dance inside the stove. "You stayed. Even when you were scared." Sadie looked at him then. Really looked. "Did you ever leave someone behind?" she asked. He swallowed. "Yes, says. Did they forgive you?" "I don't know." They sat like that for a while, the weight of old ghosts between them. Then she leaned back on the cot box, still open, eyes closing slow. Her breath evened out and her small hand rested on the ribbon. Harlan stood and stoked the fire again, kept it going through the night. He sat in the chair until the stars faded, until the sky blushed pale with morning, watching her sleep. She hadn't asked him to stay, but he stayed. By early December the ground had hardened to stone. Frost laced the tall grass each morning, and the wind came sharp off the hills. It cut through cloth like paper, made men and cattle alike flinch in their skin. Most folks would move south or hold up tight with kin. Harlan had neither, and now he had Sadie. She didn't complain about the cold, just pulled his coat tighter, wore 2 pairs of socks, and wrapped her ears with an old scarf he'd found in the bottom of a trunk. It had belonged to someone once, though he couldn't remember who. His mother, maybe? They fell into rhythm. Chores, coffee, silence. Work made them both easier to be around. She learned fast, and she didn't ask for praise, which made Harlan give it more often than he meant to. "You handle that rope better than most grown men," he told her one afternoon after she'd managed to hitch a stubborn mule to the sled. She'd smiled at that, quick and quiet, like a candle lit and blown out in the same breath. Later that day, while checking the line for any trapped hares, he heard the sound of hooves behind him. Too many to be wild. He turned, slow hand already on his rifle, and saw a man he hadn't laid eyes on in near 5 years. Ben McCrae. Big as ever, beard gray, now still wearing that ridiculous hat with the pheasant feather stuck in the band. "Well, I'll be Ben," said, reining in. "If it ain't Harlan Kane." Harlan stood still, body tense beneath his coat. "What are you doing out here?" "Was in Elkhorn. Heard someone saw you come through with a kid. Folks talk, you know." Ben dismounted with a grunt, boots sinking into frost. "I got a wife now. Step-kids. You should come by sometime." "I shouldn't," Harlan said. Ben studied him. "That your girl. She's not mine." "But you're keeping her." Harlan nodded once. Ben shifted, jaw working. "I got kin in Abilene. Folks who place orphans. Legal like. Could take her off your hands. Get her into a real home." Sadie stepped out of the brush behind them. Her cheeks were red from the cold hair tucked under her hat. "I heard what you said," she told Ben. The man looked surprised but didn't back down. "Just trying to help, sweetheart. You'd have your own room. School. Other kids." "I don't want other kids." Ben looked at Harlan. "She's not blood hair. You don't owe her nothing." Harlan's grip on the rifle didn't tighten, but his eyes did. "She stays." Ben shook his head. Still stubborn as ever. Always taken the hard way. He climbed back onto his horse. "You know where to find us if you change your mind." They watched him ride off until the dust faded. Sadie turned to Harlan. "You were friends long time ago." She kicked at a rock with the toe of her boot. "He thought I was trouble." "He was wrong." She looked up at him, face unreadable. "You think you'll change your mind?" Harlan knelt eye to eye. "No, Sadie. I won't." Her face didn't crumple or soften, but her hand found his coat sleeve and held on for just a second longer than needed. That night the wind howled harder than before. Something in it sounded like memory or warning. Harlan sat by the fire long after Sadie had gone to sleep, the rifle leaning against his knee. His hand rested on the stock like it was part of him. Ben wouldn't be back. Probably. But the world had a way of pressing in when a man started building something good. Like it couldn't stand the peace of it. He looked at Sadie sleeping in the cot, curled under two blankets, and a jacket clutching that little box of things like it was a lifeline. He wasn't her father. He wasn't even sure he knew how to be someone worth following. But she'd chosen him, and he was starting to believe she was right to. Snow came the next week, slow at first. Flurries drifting like ash across the fields, collecting in the corners of windows and boot. Then heavier, blanketing the shack and silencing the world beyond the hills. Everything softened under the weight of it. Sound, light, even breath. Sadie stood at the window with a tin cup in her hands, watching it fall like she wasn't sure whether to be afraid or not. "You ever seen snow before?" Harlan asked. She nodded. "Once. When I was real little." She didn't say where. She rarely said where or when. Only now, weeks into this uneasy rhythm, did he start to piece together the shape of her before. "We'll be snowed in," he said. 2-3 days, maybe. She looked back at him, that thoughtful stare she wore when she was testing the air. "Do we have enough food?" "Just barely. Got beans, potatoes, flour. If we stretch it." "Can I help stretch it?" He smiled just a little. "You already do." That afternoon they kneaded dough together, her small hands pressing into the sticky mound while Harlan stirred the stove fire. She dusted flour onto her nose without knowing. He didn't tell her. When the bread rose and the smell filled the room, something cracked open in the silence between them. She looked up from the oven, eyes damp but steady. "That's what it smelled like." Harlan knew what she meant. He reached over and pulled the scarf from around her neck, brushing flour from her cheek. "You hungry?" She nodded. They ate warm bread with cold beans, and it was better than anything he'd tasted in years. Later, as the wind howled around the shack like a beast with nowhere to go, Sadie brought her box out again. But this time, she didn't sit alone. She sat beside him on the floor, laying each item between them carefully. The spoon, the ribbon, the comb, then something new, a torn scrap of paper browned at the edges. "What's that?" She held it out. It was part of a letter. The ink had run in places, but he could make out the writing. "You are my wildflower, Sadie June. You grow even when the world forgets to be kind." He stared at it for a long time. "Your ma wrote this." Sadie nodded. "She left it in the box. I didn't see it until after." He handed it back gently, like it might fall apart. "She was right, you know." Sadie didn't answer, but her hand found his again. They sat like that until the fire burned low and the wind outside quieted the storm, passing like a slow exhale. The next morning he woke before light. The world outside was white and clean and still. He made coffee, cracked the window to listen for the coyotes, then heard it. A laugh. Short, sudden, small, and full of life. Sadie was outside, bundled in coat and scarf, her boots half sunk in snow. She was throwing handfuls of it into the air, spinning under the flurry like a child who'd forgotten she'd ever been afraid. He stood at the door and watched her. She turned, saw him, and smiled wide. "You said we'd be stuck," she called. "But it don't feel stuck." He stepped into his boots and walked out into the snow, the cold biting sharp against his neck. She ran up to him, breath visible in the air. "Race you to the creek," she said. "There's no creek." "Then we'll find one." She took off, and he followed. Not because he believed she'd find it, but because she made him believe something was out there waiting. By midwinter, the shack felt less like a place someone had left behind and more like something being made new, slowly, stubbornly, and without asking permission. Sadie hung herbs above the stove, what little they'd foraged before the freeze. Dried sage yarrow and one stubborn sprig of mint she'd insisted on keeping, even though it barely had a scent. "It's still alive," she'd said. "That's reason enough." Harlan had fixed the back door so it no longer creaked in the wind. He built a lean-to for firewood and started carving a new handle for Sadie's spoon. The old one had cracked from too much stirring in too many pots. They were quieter now, not out of distance but ease. Like two bodies who'd learned to share a blanket without pulling it off each other. They spoke in half-phrases and glances, and the silences weren't heavy anymore. Until the letter came. He found it in town, tucked under the lip of his saddle when he came out of the supply store. No name. No seal. Just a folded page with a woman's handwriting, slanted and pressed too hard. "She is mine. You have no right. I'll come for her before spring." No signature. No return address. Just the promise. He stared at the paper, the words swimming a little in his vision. It had no weight, no detail, and yet it hollowed him out from the inside. Sadie was stacking sacks of flour in the pantry when he returned. She looked up when he came in. "Something wrong." He shook his head. "Wind's picking up." She nodded, accepting the lie. He kept the letter folded in his coat pocket. Read it again that night by lantern light while Sadie slept with her cheek pressed against the back of her hand, a curl falling into her mouth. He didn't sleep much after that. Over the next days, he taught her how to shoot. She asked once, "Why now?" He told her, "Because you're ready." She was. Hands steady, eyes clear. She missed the first 2 shots, but hit the third clean through the can. Again, she said, jaw tight. He handed her another round. Said nothing. Each day she got faster, calmer, like she was growing into something hard and necessary. But inside the shack she was still the girl who whispered to the spoon, who tucked the comb under her pillow, who asked if birds got lonely in the winter. She didn't know about the letter. Not yet. But something in her knew change was coming. One morning after chores, she climbed onto the porch rail and sat there watching the road. She held the rifle across her knees like it belonged there. "Do you think people can come back?" she asked. He looked up from where he was mending a boot. "Come back from where?" "From being lost." He didn't answer right away. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and thaw. "I think some don't want to." She nodded. "But some do." He looked at her, this girl with 2 old eyes and a ribbon in her pocket. "Yeah," he said. "Some do." Sadie stared at the horizon. "If she comes, I want to be the one who talks to her." He didn't ask how she knew, or who she was. He just said, "You won't have to stand alone." She looked over at him. "You promise?" He nodded. "I do." And for the first time she leaned her head against his shoulder. Outside, the snow was beginning to melt. The creek, the one they hadn't found, was beginning to speak under the ice. Small sounds, the kind you only hear when you're listening close. The woman came at dusk, not from the road, but from the woods behind the ridge, where the snow stayed longer and sound traveled farther. Harlan saw her first dark figure against the pale drifts, walking with a purpose that didn't waver even when the wind picked up. Sadie stood beside him at the window. She didn't ask who it was. Didn't move either. They watched her come. She wore a long brown coat, cinched too tight at the waist, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over her face. Her boots left a straight line of prints, each one precise. There was no horse, no wagon, just her. "She's alone," Sadie said. "Looks that way." "She always was," Sadie added. "Even when she wasn't." Harlan glanced down. Sadie had the rifle slung across her back, the strap cutting across her chest like it belonged there. But her hands were empty. He opened the door before the woman knocked. She looked older than he expected. Not in years, but in wear. Lines etched deep where life had folded her again and again. Her hair, braided in a long black rope down her back, had silver in it now. She didn't smile. "You're Harlan Kane." "I am." She turned her gaze to Sadie. Didn't soften. "You gonna make me say it?" she asked the girl. Sadie stepped forward. "Say what?" "That I came to take you home. This is home." The woman looked around like she was tasting the air. "This some shack buried in snow with a man you don't know." "I know him better than I knew you." The silence after that was heavy and still. Harlan didn't move. He watched the woman's hands, her eyes. She wasn't armed, not visibly, but she had the look of someone who'd pulled a trigger more than once. "I'm her mother," she said, voice low and even. "And you have no right." "You left her," he replied. "I left the house," she snapped, "to find food, to ask the banker for more time. I came back and the roof was ash. There was no one." Harlan narrowed his eyes. "Then why the letter, no name?" "Just threat." "Because I thought you were a man taking what wasn't his." Her voice cracked there. She caught it, held it down. "I thought you stole her." "I didn't." "I see that now." Sadie stepped between them. "Not a girl anymore." "Not quite." "I waited for you," she said. "By the fire. Like you told me." Her mother's jaw clenched, her eyes wet. "And I came back to nothing. You don't know what that does to a person." Sadie didn't blink. "I do." The woman stepped forward, slow, reached out. But Sadie stepped back. "I buried you in my heart," her mother whispered. "I cried for you every day." "I buried you in the fire," Sadie said. "And I stopped crying." Her mother stood still, hand out, shaking slightly. "You're my child." "I was, while, but I made a new family." The woman's hand dropped. Her face shifted, some mixture of grief and understanding, like an old wound breaking open just to heal again slower. She looked at Harlan. You keep her warm. You teach her right? I will. She nodded once, like that was all she had left. Then she turned and walked back into the snow. No parting words. No backward glance. Just gone. Sadie stood there long after, eyes fixed on the woods. You all right? Harlan asked. She nodded. She didn't come back to stay, just to see if she still had a place. And I think she knows. The stars came out slow, blinking into the dark. Inside, the fire crackled back to life. Sadie laid the letter into it, watched it curl and vanish. She sat beside Harlan, knees pulled to her chest, back to the warm stove. I think I'm ready, she said. For what? Why? To belong somewhere. He looked over, his voice quiet. You already do. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the comb. Set it on the table between them. Then the ribbon, the spoon, the paper. I want to keep these, she said, but not because I'm still waiting. He nodded. Then keep them. That night the wind softened. The creek, long buried under ice, ran clear. The thaw came sudden. It began with the sound of dripping, just a slow, steady tap from the eaves, like the land was exhaling. Then the snow started to slouch off the roof, and patches of earth peeked through the white. Brown, stubborn, full of promise. The creek ran louder now, cutting through the gully like it had somewhere to be. Sadie stood barefoot on the wet porch planks one morning, toes curled against the cold face lifted to the sun, like she was trying to remember what it felt like before everything burned. Feels different, she said. Harlan leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. It is. Is it always like this after winter? Most years. She nodded. Then we're most people now. It wasn't said with sadness, just recognition. They'd stepped into the rhythm of something bigger than grief. That day they rode out together. Sadie took the mare. She sat tall in the saddle now, reins loose, body moving with the animal like she was born to it. Harlan rode beside her, pack tied behind the saddle, rifle slung at his back. They passed the remains of the house. What was left of it anyway? A few blackened stones, a rusted hinge. Sadie didn't flinch when she looked, just studied the spot a while. I thought I'd always be haunted by it, she said. You're not? I'm still haunted, but not just by that. She turned her gaze toward the line of hills ahead. I dream of things now, good ones. They stopped at the gravesite he'd made months ago for a neighbor woman no one came to claim. Sadie placed the ribbon there, tied it to the bent cross with careful hands. Harlan didn't ask why. She didn't say. Back at the shack that night, she took the comb and pressed it into the dirt near the doorstep. Not buried, just placed there like a marker. For growing things, she said. I think Mama would have liked that. They ate in peace. Beans again. But now with dried onions and a little salt traded from town. The world wasn't richer, but it felt more full. Harlan pulled a box from the shelf above his cot. One he hadn't opened in years. Inside, wrapped in a faded feed sack, was a small ring. Gold, dulled with time, carved with the letters M and C. Sadie looked at it and raised an eyebrow. Whose was that? My parents. He gave it to her when they were still poor. Said it meant more that way. She touched the edge of it, then glanced up at him. You keeping it for someone? I was. A quiet passed between them. Not the heavy kind. The real kind. The kind that lets you breathe more than it weighs. He slid the box across the table. I think you should have it. Her eyes widened. It's not mine. It can be. Someday. For someone you trust. She held it like it might vanish. I'll wait till I know what to do with it. Good, he said. Spring came fast after that. Mud clung to their boots. Grass broke through the thaw. Birds returned singing songs that felt too cheerful for what they'd lived through, but Sadie sang back, sometimes humming under her breath as she swept the porch or fed the hens Harlan had traded for. She was still quiet, still carried something inside her that hadn't yet found words. But she was alive, rooted, unafraid. One evening she stood beside him as he mended a saddle. "I was thinking," she said, hands deep in her pockets, "maybe we could build another room onto the shack. Just a little one." He looked up. "What for?" "I don't know. In case someone comes." He nodded. "All right." Then she added, "Or in case I stay." He set the saddle down and looked at her. Really looked. "You don't have to ask." "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." That night they sat under the stars on the porch. No ghosts, no fire behind them. Just the long stretch of prairie and the quiet sound of water running towards someplace new. The ribbon was still tied to the grave. The comb stayed at the door. And inside, on a shelf beside the girl's small box of treasures, was a gold ring waiting for its next story. Subscribe to the channel and stand with those who endure when the world would see them fall.